Welcome to the Connected Conversation with Brett Hill, a well-known mindfulness and somatic coach and coach trainer, as he demonstrates the power of mindful communication to change your life, work, and the world. Disconnected is the new normal. People are feeling overdriven, overwhelmed, and disconnected from meaningful conversations. But it doesn't have to be that way. Step into a life that works for you. Flourish and give voice to your natural creativity and purpose as you learn how to connect deeply and authentically with yourself, others, and the world. The Connected Conversation with Brett Hill starts now.
Hello, and welcome to this edition of the Connected Conversation. My name is Brett Hill. I'm a mindful somatic coach and coach trainer and founder of the Mindful Coach Association. And my specialty has been, for a long time now, mindful communication with the intention of helping people have better lives. Because, oh my God, these days, I think just yesterday I read that the Surgeon General had declared an epidemic of loneliness. It's like, oh, wow, that's a big deal. And I thought that was so ironic because we're in a culture these days where we're supposed to be experiencing better connectivity than ever with these devices, phones and social media and all of the ways we're supposed to be so wired. We're so connected, in quotes, but yet there's an epidemic of loneliness. What the heck is that all about? How does that work? And it just goes to show, goes to illustrate and amplify the message, the meaning, the importance, and the consequence of simply putting words out and not actually connecting heart to heart, and in some cases, face to face. I want to be clear, I'm not down on social media at all. I think it's great in a lot of ways, but it also introduces a lot of change in the way that we communicate. There was a very famous guy most people haven't heard of named Marshall McLuhan, who was a communications professor back in the day. And he was very famous for saying something that kind of rocked the academic world at the time, which is, the medium is the message. The medium is the message. And what he meant to say by that is that the means by which you communicate actually, in many cases, overtakes the content that you're communicating. And so television, radio were the big things back in the day when this was out. But now with social media, it's like, what does this mean? How does that change how we connect and interact with each other? And let's be clear, it absolutely does change how we interact with each other. There's a giant amount of new behavior that didn't exist before in the way that, we text message each other. And like a phone, people do less and less like calling and hearing actual voices on the other end of the line. And that creates in the technical world, they call this asynchronous communication, meaning I can, if you were just to illustrate it in a sort of a very mechanical way, I take a Post-it note and I put it on someone's desk and then come back to my office. Then I go on a break and I come back and they took a Post-it note and put it on my desk in response. And then I go write a response. I go put it on their desk. So it's sort of like, you don't have to be present in the moment for those conversations to happen. They happen whenever you can get to them. That's like texting. If you automated that process, that'd be texting. Can you have connected conversations that way? Yes, absolutely you can. Do you have connected conversations that way? And does it facilitate that? Does it lead to more connection or just more conversations? Right? Just more quick conversations, because these days, also because of the medium, you want to have those messages be brief. It's difficult to explain the fullness of a scenario in when you have to type it out every word for word, letter for letter. You can communicate much, much faster vocally than you can with the written word. All those things have an impact. Now, what does this have to do with intuition? You're going to connect with intuition, which is the subject of this particular podcast, only when you connect to yourself and to your experience in a big way. And so the antidote to loneliness is connection, right? And that also gives rise to lots of other goodness in the world. When you know how to connect to others, to yourself, to your moment, then it's challenging to actually feel like you're alone or lonely because you feel you're wired in, you're plugged in, you're feeling. Ron Kurtz, the founder of Hakomi, used to call it non-egocentric nourishment, meaning it's not about me. It's not about, oh, they like me and I feel good about me and I must be pretty or I must be handsome or I must be whatever I've got because they like. It's not about me. It's about, do I feel connected in my heart and in my, and in my soul in a way to the world, to other people, to the planet, to your mission in the world. And that is the bigger message about the connected conversation. It's actually, the connected life. And if you feel connected, you can have a connected conversation. You can have a connected life. How do you do that? And what do you connect to? And how do you go about doing it? Because these days, what are you connected to? And that's really the question. And I'm going to invite you actually to think about that one. And then let's take a breath and slow it down for a minute and take a moment and turn your attention to your senses right now. And you can do this without closing your eyes. And just ask yourself, what am I connected to? Maybe I'm connected to not, you're driving the car and I don't want to be hit by another car, and that's legit, right? Or is it you're connected to just getting to the next thing, and that's your experience all day long, and that's not really very satisfying? Or maybe you're worried about a friend, a neighbor, yourself. Maybe you're driven by some passion to serve. Maybe you're connected to fear of not being enough. Maybe you're connected to simply trying to make it through the day. And we're through this next moment. And there's plenty of people in that category. And blessings to you if that's the case. What are you connected to? And that's what you bring to your next engagement, to your next conversation, to your next interaction with someone. What are you connected to? Take a moment and really just sense into that. And when you do this, when you slow things down a little bit and you turn your attention to your senses, you begin to lay the foundations for the kind of experience, the kind of inner state of being, the inner state of awareness, in a more scientific way, the neurological conditions that are necessary for you to be able to sense more subtle things. So, if someone walks in the room and they start yelling at you, that has a big impact on your nervous system. If someone walks in the room and they look pretty luscious and they come over and give you a hug, that has a big impact on your nervous system. If you turn your senses to those feelings, you begin to notice what's it like for you simply to be a person that has feelings. What are those feelings? What are those sensations? So while someone walks in the room and does something big and there are big sensations, there are a lot of more subtle ones. What happens to you whenever you notice something that you really like? Maybe you like music and you hear a passage and you go, wow. And that wow You're connecting to something that takes you out of your normal state. You look at the tree waving in the wind, and you go, wow, that is really something if you really hang out and watch it. And watch the clouds, you look at a flower, you see a beautiful face, you see a happy dog, you see a child, you see something that you like, you taste something that you like, you drink something that you like, and it like goes, whoa, just blows up in your senses. Those moments connect you to a bigger moment than the one you were having. That's why there's a wow. It's like a whoom. It's like, yow, I got transported from my everyday ordinary state of mind to something that's unusual. Now, in those moments, you can learn to curate those moments. You can learn to have a lot more of them. And when you do, you're taking responsibility for having better moments in your life. That's a big deal. I want to say that again. That is a big, big deal. When you decide, I am going to connect to the richness of my everyday experience that's just laying around. Sometimes I say there are diamonds on the ground. You just have to notice them. And when you do, your nervous system slows itself down. Actually, in another way, I say it, you experience this. People have reported that, oh, I feel slower inside. But actually, you're actually faster. And that's a kind of an ironic situation. But the thing that's happening is that you've tuned up your nervous system to pay very, very refined, to pay attention in a very, very refined way. And so, boom, a whole lot of energy becomes available to you in your nervous system to notice things. And what it feels like subjectively is that you're slower, but actually you're noticing things because you're slowing things, you're noticing more things. It's kind of interesting. Have you ever been in an airplane, looked out the window for a long time and noticed how you kind of go into this contemplative sort of space? But really, you're moving like 1,000,000 miles an hour, much faster than you do normally. And it's kind of like that, except your stream of consciousness doesn't go, it's not like on fire. Instead, it's more relaxed. It's this open awareness, as they call it in the mindfulness world, this open awareness. And when you enter the state of open awareness, you open yourself up to receive information that you normally just miss. And it is in this space that we begin our conversation around intuition. It's in the space of being open and present to your experience that you learn to create the conditions where intuition can arise. And I've got so much to say about intuition, plus some stories about intuitive things that have changed my life in a pretty dramatic way. So when we come back from this break, I'll tell you how listening to my intuition changed my life in a huge way. I actually packed up and left the city. Yep, that happened. So we'll be back soon. This is Brett Hill with the Connected Conversation. Welcome back to the Connected Conversation. I'm your host, Brett Hill, and we are talking about intuition and the power of intuition to be an active agent in your life. In the previous segment, we were talking about creating the conditions where intuition can arise and the need to connect to your inner state in such a way that you can create some spaciousness to listen to the more subtle connections. Now, before we go on too far here, I want to press pause on that for a second and talk about the different ways that intuition can show up in your world. There are a variety of levels of intuition, and intuition can enter into you in a number of ways. But first, let's say what intuition is. Now, we don't honestly know for real, what the actual tangible definition of intuition is, because we don't have good definitions for a lot of things like mindfulness or consciousness. And the way I describe it is like we describe a lot of things when we don't know what they really are. We describe the function, how they look and feel, as if that was what they really are, but really it's just a description of them, right? So the way I distinguish it from other types of experiences is that it's information that I feel is true or likely to be true that I have no rational way to know. I can't tell you how I know that it's so, but yet there's this distinct sense that it is so, that it could be true or it's likely to be true. Now, that's a very interesting phenomenon for a human being to have, that by you're just walking along and all of a sudden you have an experience of some kind, or you have a thought or feeling or sensation, and they can come up in those, all of that. It can be a thought, feeling, sensation, emotion, that there's something that needs to happen or something that has happened, and you have a sense about it, some information, or maybe even an urge to take an action. So sometimes they come up as urges. I was reading a book by Gabriel Roth, who was created the wave method for ecstatic dance, who I studied with her for a while, and it was fabulous stuff. But she wrote in one of her books, she was having lunch at a fast food place, and she was sitting there with a friend at a table, and she had this urgent sense that they needed to change tables. Now that's irrational, what I call irrational. I'm not going to say it's like insane, because it's not like she imagined that an elephant appeared in the room. Instead, she just felt like, hey, we need to get up and move. And so she and her friend did. And the way she talked about it, because she was in a pretty shamanic sort of place a lot of the times, is that it was no big deal. This was like routine day-to-day experience in terms of, yeah, okay, I get impressions, I get urges like that, and just acts on them without trying to make a big meaning out of it. She got up and she moved, and a few minutes later, the light fixture that was above the table that they were at came crashing down and, broke all over the table. So, and had they been sitting at that table, things might have been a little bit difficult. And so her intuition somehow tuned in, something in the world arose in her to say, this space that you're in right now is not safe at some point in the near future, and moved her to get up and move. Now that's a pretty interesting thing. And is that like just chance? Is it true? Well, I don't know, because I wasn't there and I'm not her, but I'm me. And so I would take that kind of information with a grain of salt. However, in my own personal life, I have stories that are just as real. So I'll tell you one of those. I was, when I was in my 20s, I happened through a series of circumstances to own a bunch, like 5 used record stores. This was back in the day when vinyl was a big deal. And I had, through another intuition, come into ownership of that I actually built from the ground up these record stores. And it was a great time. I was having a blast. I mean, we were really doing a fun business. I was in music, which I loved, and I was meeting people, and we were selling tickets to concerts. And so I got to meet a whole bunch of musicians back in the day. Really, really great time. And I was laying down one evening on the sofa, reading a book. And all of a sudden, out of the clear blue, now I want to say back at this time in my life, I wasn't connected to this inner mystical world or, super spiritual character or anything like that. I simply was just a guy getting by and having a good time, and, like a lot of guys. And I'm sitting there watching reading this book. And all of a sudden, I had this feeling that if I picked up my phone and called the store, which was about 20 miles away, that this was about 10:30 at night, that I would interrupt some people that were about to rob the store. And I'm like, wait, what? Here I am reading a book, and all of a sudden, Brett, you need to go pick up the phone and call because the store's going to be robbed. That sense, it didn't come up in words. It was just like a sense, like, oh, it was almost like somebody had just dropped a note into my nervous system, like store being robbed, call and interrupt, and like, okay. And so I found myself with the phone in my hand, dialing the phone number, and I'm getting to the last number, and I go, and my logical mind kicks in and go, wait, what? Really? Come on. And so I put the phone down, went back, laid down, started reading the book again. I got about 5 paragraphs in. I'm going, I could not shake this feeling. It was like very pronounced. I'm going, okay, this is crazy. So I've got up, picked up the phone again, started to dial, and then I got to the last number again. And I thought, you know what? This store, it was a really small store. And I thought, if the store is being robbed, the store didn't have more than, a small amount of inventory comparatively. And I thought, so what? It's like, and I'm overinsured for the goods in the store. They could go in and wreck the whole store, and it would be, unfun, but I wouldn't lose any money on the deal because I'm overinsured. And the value of knowing whether or not this store was robbed is worth far more than the hassle involved. Because if the store is robbed, then I have a firsthand experience that I have confirmed in the real world that you can just get information out of the air about things that are happening miles and miles away. And it would prove to me that there is some mechanism in reality for simply knowing things that you have no rational way to know. There was no way for me to know this. There wasn't a video feed going on. There wasn't anything happening. It was just, oh, well, I thought, the value of that is immense. So I hung up the phone, drove up there the next morning, and the store had been robbed. And I'm going, and so that blew my mind, of course, because now I know for real. I had a Gabriel Roth sort of moment like that, except that this was a little bit more profound to me. Well, it was to me, so it was more profound. It's like, okay, so what do I do with that information? How do I adapt my worldview to begin to understand that this is a thing? This isn't just me wondering anymore. I now know that it's not only possible, but it's possible for me. And so that changed my whole world, of course, to have it be such a direct and personal experience. And so I began a much more serious inquiry into what's this all about? How does this work? How can I be available to this kind of information? And so that started me on a sequence of practices and studies that led me into meditation. And I began to do this energy work with meditation that woke me up, so to speak, to a whole giant world of, let's call it the invisible world. And that's really the space of what goes on between us, how we connect to not only each other, but to the world in a very beautiful and profound way, where you can walk around in a state of connectedness to a much, much bigger thing than what do I look like? How much does this person like me? Am I making enough money? Am I driving a big enough car? Worried about the day? And that's why I do this podcast, The Connected Conversation, because it's about what are you connected to? And what I had learned is that you can connect to these bigger spaces, this inner world that is actually the outer world as well. There's only one moment. Bottom line, there's only one moment. And the whole world, the whole manifestation of now is in that moment, the inner world and the outer world. And so by learning to tune to yourself, by learning to connect to your own senses, by learning to connect to what's true for you, and sometimes what's true for you is pretty painful, and sometimes what's true for you is pretty ecstatic. But it doesn't have to be drama. You don't want to be going for drama, although that can be dramatic. The thing is, when you open the door to awareness of what is so, and then acceptance of what is so, yeah, it's dramatic. Yeah, it's painful. Yeah, it's ecstatic. That's just a truth. Doesn't necessarily have to have this big, overwhelming meaning, even though it might feel big. Then you lay the foundations for connecting to these magnificent moments. And Einstein said there is no logical way to the discovery of what he called elemental laws, the natural world. There is only the way of intuition, which is helped by a feeling for the order lying behind the appearance. And so a big part of learning to use your intuition is learning to listen behind, listen between the space behind the words that are spoken, the experience that you're having, the way that things are showing up in your world. When you learn to kind of zoom out like you're riding in the airplane at 30,000 feet, and at the same time be present for it in the moment, then you open the door to this kind of information, this kind of connection to the world. Got a lot more to say about that, and you'll hear about it when we come back. This is Brett Hill with the Connected Conversation. Brett Hill with the Connected Conversation, and we're talking today about the power of intuition to rock your world. And how can you connect to it? What does it show up like? I've made a study of intuition quite intensively for the last many years. And one of the things that's of interest to me the most is the way it shows up for different people. And I want to put it out there that intuition is different for people, in the sense that you have your own form of intuition, your own way that it shows up. If you've ever watched one of these psychic mediums who channel, people who've crossed over, you'll hear them say things like, "Oh, I'm seeing a red rose, which is the symbol for me that means X, Y, Z, that means something," or "I'm seeing a bird, and to me that means X, Y, Z." So in other words, there's an inner symbology that has meaning to them that they've learned over time. And I find that really interesting. Like, why that symbol? How is it that particular thing shows up? And why is it different for different people? It means that, like, if I say the word hello, it's the same word for everyone in the English language. It doesn't show up as a different word, but it means the same thing. And what I mean by that is, like, okay, so you go inside, you close your eyes, you connect with maybe this inner world, and a bird shows up for one person in their imagination, and it means something completely different than if a bird shows up in somebody else's imagination. And so it's like, oh, that kind of strange thing fascinates me, because that's the world of intuition. That's where intuition lives. And so what I'm trying to say is, become familiar with your own inner sensitivities of things and what lights up for you in these subtle worlds. I'm sensitive, for example, to quite a few things, as it turns out, but one of them is spaces. So I'll walk into a room, and there'll be a vibe in the room, and I'm checking it out. So another thing is, like, chairs. When I sit down in a chair, I feel like there's an energy in the chair, and the chair may have a vibe from other people or something, particularly like a therapist chair or a doctor's office chair or a dentist chair or some chair where there's been a lot of people who are sitting in there that have some kind of thing going on. It's a little bit disturbing in a way, because I feel like I'm sitting on like these feelings, and it's not an idea. It's like, it's an experience. It's like, there's something on the chair that I don't like. It's almost like as if there were the chair was emanating an aura or an odor and of some sort, and not necessarily a foul one, but some kind of scent. And I'm sitting in it, right? It's kind of like, and I'm the only one in the room kind of tuned into that usually. So it's kind of like, this feels a little odd. So learning that about myself, though, is great to know a piece of myself, because I honor that in myself now. It's not, I don't override it. I will not sit in some chairs. I just won't do it. Or I'll spend a little time kind of like in another show, I might talk about clearing energy, but it's sort of like working on, I've got to tune this place up a little bit so that it's okay for me to be here. Those are the kinds of things that can go on for you once you're tuned into it. I once had a friend she was fabulous, and she was tuned into fabrics, and I really appreciated her intuition, because she would comment on people's fabrics, meaning like the clothes that they wore or the way that clothing moved. I'd never met anybody like that. And so she would say to someone, I don't know why, but I'm thinking of these linen drapes blowing in the wind whenever I look at you. And she was always relating to that. So I want to talk for a moment about how intuition shows up in you. And so for me, it shows up as often subtle impressions. Sometimes it can be sharp and clear and nonverbal, like the example that I gave of the story where I felt like the store was being robbed. That was, I wouldn't say sharp, but I would say strong. It was like, there's a sudden urge that kind of comes up out of the core of your body to take an action. So there's an urge to take an action, and intuition can be like that. I know, and this is a true story of a woman who I'm close to, who was traveling with some friends, and she and her friends were staying overnight at an acquaintance's place up in the Northeast. And she had this funny vibe, and she wasn't really clear about what it was. And after they had had dinner, they were a little ill, and she didn't quite feel right. And she had this feeling, we have to get out of here. Our lives are at risk. And she's not the kind of person who would normally have those kinds of things. She doesn't get that many intuitive impressions, but when she does, she really, really gets them, and they're very body-based and very how should I say that? It's not unclear at all. It's always very direct and to the point. And in this case, it was like they had to get out of there. So they packed up in the middle of the night and left. And years later, that same guy was found guilty of literally murdering people by poisoning them at his house, just like they were there. And so they were in the middle of the presence of the guy who had murderous intentions, and she vibed in on it and got the heck out of there with her and her friends. That's an actual true story. So intuition can save your life. Could have saved me from being robbed. It kept Gabriel Roth from being, slammed by a lamp that fell from the ceiling. Saved my friend, potentially, and her colleagues. This could matter. This can really make a difference in your life. How do you learn to tune into intuition in a way where it can be that kind of a thing for you? First of all, you have to realize that you're getting these impressions and that they're there for you by creating the space inside for yourself to receive that information. When you get it, when you have an impression of some kind that is irrational and unexpected, those are the things that you want to pay attention to. the ones that don't make sense, and they kind of come out of the blue. They're unexpected. When I was having my picture taken for a magazine I was going to be on, this photographer, I had to hang out with him for a couple of hours. And so whenever that happens, my intuitive senses go to work and I tend to vibe into somebody. And whenever I do, I get impressions about them. And then after a while, I don't normally say something, but the point, and I want to talk about this in the last segment, like how to give voice to your intuition so you can learn to use it. In this case, I look for situations where there's low risk, high reward, so that I can say something that's unexpected and have it be kind of just, hey, I'm just testing the water here. Is this for real? Am I making this up? No, what's going on? I don't know, but let me find out. And so I'm tuning into this guy, I'm tuning in a meeting, and I'm just kind of hanging out with him and seeing what impressions come in. So I'm not like focused on what is the truth, the deeper metaphysical meaning of this guy. No, it's more like, oh, here's a guy. What's my senses? What are my senses of this guy? What's showing up for me here? And whenever I do that, stuff comes up because I've learned how to listen in a very, very refined way. And so a big part of this is just simply learning to pay attention to your senses, which is where we started the show, right? Paying attention to your senses in a way where you're really, really noticing, and you're just noticing the dance of impressions that come across your senses. Oh, there's this. For some reason with this guy, I felt water, and and this image of like a cabin on the water kind of came into my head out of nowhere, and I have no reason to imagine that. I was just wondering. So I said to him, after a couple of hours of working with him, I said, did you happen to live near or grow up near water? And I also had this sense of like him as a younger character. And he said, and he looked at me and he stopped and he tilted his head. And he goes, what's going on here? You know, and I'm going, nothing. I'm just wondering. It's just, I get intuition sometimes, and I check them out. And so I'm just not afraid. And I'm not afraid to be wrong. It's okay with me because I've got enough of a catalog of experience that I know I'm an intuitive character. I know that. And if I don't get it right, I don't have to worry about it. But it's still fun for me to kind of check and see so I can refine my own relationship to my own inner vocabulary, intuitive vocabulary. This is how you can begin to work with. So this sense of this cabin comes up. I had a feeling of a younger version of him, water. And I said, did you grow up near the water? And he said, yeah, he grew up on kind of a lake cabin for most of his life. And so, you know, that was a case of me just validating testing, if you will, my intuitive impression. And this was subtle. It wasn't like sharp, like, oh my God, I got to escape the mass murderer. It was just a very subtle impression. And those are the kinds of things that you can begin to give voice to in your life in ways that are not threatening. They're not going to change the world. They're just a way for you to begin to explore what's true and what's not. And you can't be afraid of being wrong. You can't go, oh, I'm terrible at this or whatever. You're just exploring. And in this way, you can see how this works for you or not. And there's multiple layers of intuitive information. The key things you want to look for are the ones that don't make sense. They just come out of the blue. Remember the story, of the store was being robbed. That didn't make any sense. I didn't have any rational way to know. So the things that you have no rational way to know, the image of a bird shows up. As you can tell, I kind of get animal images a lot with people. Sometimes they're about actual animals. Sometimes they're about energies, if you will. They're about relationships to the world, the natural world. And sometimes they're just me making stuff up because that's the way I relate to the world. And so it's okay. It's all fine. It's just part of getting to know kind of how I am experiencing another person. And in this way, you can connect to this really, really, really rich world of this, invisible connectiveness. And when you are in tune, when you learn to tune this up in a way that it actually serves you, you begin to develop the capacity to really connect with people in a fairly profound way. And it's all happening kind of behind the scenes. You're sensing who people are in a really deep way. And, I think maybe I'd like to do some of that on the show, like have some people call up and we go deep and see what happens from an intuitive place sometime. I'll set that up for a future show. But that's an example of how you can tune to people in a way and begin to explore your intuitions, give voice to them so that you can add this to your life in a way that really is meaning and connect and creates connection. And after all, that's what this is about, the connected conversation. And we'll be back after this break. Hello, this is Brett Hill with the Connected Conversation, and I wanted to read to you a quote from the famous psychologist Carl Rogers. Carl Rogers was the founder, creator of an entire branch of psychology called humanism. And we've been talking about intuition on the show here and the place in which intuition arises and connection, because after all, this is the connected conversation. And the quote goes like this: "There is another peculiar satisfaction in really hearing someone. It is like listening to the music of the spheres, because beyond the immediate message of the person, no matter what that might be, there is the universal." Wow. This quote really reaches me, because when you're really listening, the peculiar satisfaction in, quote, really hearing someone, not just attending to someone while you're connected to, what am I going to say next? I hope I'm clever enough. I hope I'm smart enough. I hope they like me. I hope I don't make myself look bad. But instead, you're connected to really hearing them. Now, this is the space I was talking about earlier, where you're slowed down enough inside that you can notice what the heck is going on. You're not distracting yourself with all these thoughts and feelings about yourself or about tomorrow. You're in the moment. This is a practice of mindfulness. And I'm also, I'm a mindful somatic coach, so this is something I help people do. Connect to this moment. Connect to this person. Connect to these words. It's like listening to the music of the spheres, the dance, the cosmic dance, if you will, and he's talking about the rotation of the planets and the galaxies. It's like there's a force in it. There's a dynamics that causes this complex but orderly interaction of objects. And by object, I'm talking about inconceivable size of objects, like planets and suns and galaxies. They interact in ways that are somewhat predictable. We understand the laws of physics enough to be able to describe how that happens. And people are the same way. We interact in ways that are orderly in a certain way. And there's an underlying structure to it. You can't see gravity, right? But wow, does it have a dramatic impact on our lives? You pick something up, it falls to the floor. You're born and you live your entire life in a field of gravity. It rules, dominates your life, and you can't even see it. It's a massive force that is pervasive, that we all live in, and we just take it for granted because it's everywhere all the time. This is what's normal. An invisible force that basically is the thing that makes life happen on the planet. If it wasn't for that, none of us would be here. So we don't see it because It's everywhere. It's pervasive. So, but what happens if you start to think about the things that people don't see? Even though you can't see it, you can become aware of it. You can feel the weight of your feet on the ground. You can feel what it's like to move through space in your body in a way that causes you to need to have a facility for not just simply falling over. And if you lose that facility, you got problems. We take it for granted, though, because most of us don't have that trouble. But it wasn't always so. We were toddlers learning to walk. And we've all been through that experience. And the reason I'm talking about this is because if you look beyond, if you connect to the invisible that is gluing us all together, or gluing is a little strong word, I would say, the framework in which we manifest, there's content there. And that content shows up in our hearts and our minds and our thoughts and our feelings and emotions as a sense, kind of a fuzzy sense of, often a fuzzy sense of what's really going on, what's going on behind the scenes. Beyond the immediate message of the person, beyond the immediate message, oh, I'm worried about this, I'm not getting here, I'm wondering about my son, daughter, lover, friend, mother, father. No matter what that might be, there is the universal. I'm someone who cares about other people. In my world, caring matters. And the bigger question then is, what is this person's relationship to caring? What's caring like for them? And it's showing up in a million relationships. My caring world is like this, it's like this. And when you connect to, I'm speaking with someone who's struggling with how to be a caring person in the world. Aren't we all? Or how to have boundaries around caring. I'm giving myself away in an effort to be loved. You can hear these messages in people if you listen for not the words, but the music, if you will, the music that they're playing, the deeper meaning. In my class I teach called the Mindful Coach Method, I teach coaches and other therapists and stuff to listen for themes. So what's the theme that's playing? What's the musical theme, so to speak, for a person that you're talking? Remember, I gave you the example of the guy who lived at the lake, right? And so there was kind of a water theme for this guy. And I just said, what's water like to you? And it was like, oh my God. I asked another woman I was on a call with in an intuition workshop that I was leading. And I said, I was doing a bit of a demonstration, and I just looked at her and kind of tuned in, we got real sensitive and listened to what came up in my senses around her. And I could just see a wall of books. I felt her reading. I could feel her organizing herself around words. And so I just said, what's your relationship to books? And she just kind of lit up and she goes, oh my God, I'm a bibliophile, which is a big word for I love books. A lover of books. She says, I read voraciously. It's been a big thing for me. And so this was just, a validation. Once again, I wasn't looking at it for validation as much as I was for connection. This helps me connect to her in a profound way that is beyond just, hi, how you doing? More like, who are you? Who are you? I just want to say, remember I started this with, there's an epidemic of loneliness in our country. But we can learn to connect to who we are in a deeper way that is beyond the superficial level. And you can do that with people you don't know, and you can do it very quickly. And they don't even have to know. I do this all the time. And it's a really, really rich place to live. You're looking at someone and you're feeling into who they are. You can see their joys, their struggles, their fears, their concerns. You can almost feel their ancestry in the room, because we are all connected in profound ways to life, to love, to peace, to justice, to beauty. Whether or not you're experiencing that connection is another thing. There is a connection there, because that's what's at our core. That's what's in our core. We all want to thrive. We all want to be whole. We all want to be more integrated. Every person wants to be that. That's what it means to be alive. Your organism, your cells, they want to organize and be a whole experience that lives and thrives. And that's what we experience in our heart and our soul. And that's what we want to be as people and as a nation and as a world. And that, my friends, is what it means to be attentive to and to work towards having a connected conversation, connected to your life, connected to other people, connected to the world, and a bigger expression of that even. And so I'd like to thank you for listening to the Connected Conversation and this particular episode of Intuition, which is powerful for me. If you'll sign up at the connectedconversation.com for the newsletter, you'll get an invitation to an intuition workshop that I do once a month that's completely free. And hope you can join us there. So thanks for listening. This is Brett Hill with the Connected Conversation.
Thank you for joining us today on the Connected Conversation with Brett Hill on transformationtalkradio.com. Tune in next time to experience the power of mindful communication to bring deeper meaning to your life, work, and the world. Brett is here to help you step into a life that works for you, to help you flourish and give voice to your natural creativity and purpose. See you here next time on the Connected Conversation to learn how to enjoy the experience of your moment-to-moment life. For more information, visit theconnectedconversation.com.